Welcome to Community Watch, and today we have a fascinating guest for today, Mr. Jay Beck. He's a former Carter administration employee and a novelist of 5 books. Community Watch starts now.
Welcome to Community Watch. Greg, how are you?
I'm fine, brother. And yourself?
It's good to see you. It's good to see you as always. And I'm constantly impressed with that very neat office that you use. It's remarkable.
I keep telling you, you can get one too.
I don't know. I'm just overwhelmed by it. I know you. Among the two of us, you are probably the one that's most interested in politics, but I think you will be really impressed with our guest today. We're so fortunate to have him. I know that you, Greg, have lived many lives, but I don't know if you can compete with our guest today. This gentleman's resume is a book in itself, but we're lucky to have him. He has served in political capacities in the past. Of course, manages his own communication firm, and is a novelist. And I think we'll try to talk about all those things. So welcome to the show, Jay Beck. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate being with both of you guys.
Well, I had a chance to look at a resume that just bewildered me, how much you have done in the place. I mean, it looks like your marketing business has dealt with, in addition to the Carter Center, you've worked with the PGA Tour and professional tennis, and have set up staffs in Australia and Monaco, and goodness, that alone would take up our 30 minutes, I think. But
those are the trips you want to be on.
Yeah, we need to talk off the air about how we can manage that. I think Greg would be interested too.
We should do the next one of these remote, right?
Yes. We've been trying that.
Well, I do, of course, want to talk about your latest novel and your career writing, and we'll get to that. But I was very curious about it because I know you worked as a campaign manager for a time, and that you worked actually in the executive office of the president under Jimmy Carter.
Yes, sir.
So tell us a little bit about how you became involved in that job and what your role was exactly.
I kind of got involved early in politics. My best friend growing up was a guy named Hamilton Jordan. Hamilton was President Carter's chief of staff in the White House, but we both grew up in Albany, Georgia, and worked in, running friends for offices in high school and this and that, and then in college and later on got involved in politics. I had an ad agency. I did commercials for people running for, state legislature, lieutenant governor, things of that nature in Georgia. And then I went to Washington with Hamilton. I got involved in the Carter administration and worked in regulatory reform and deregulation. We spent a lot of time deregulating business, where lobbyists would, in previous years, put in rules and regulation to inhibit competition. So they would restrict other businesses from getting involved in their client's business. And we went in there and kind of pulled those plugs out. We were involved in deregulating banking, transportation, commerce. Y'all are too young, but there used to be a thing called Ma Bell. AT&T used to control all of the phone service in the country. They had it all. It was a monopoly. We deregulated AT&T, which is one of the reasons we've got these cell phones now, because you had competition coming in and started breaking up long distance. We don't pay long distance bills anymore. All that changed. One of the best things that happened in deregulations, we found old regulations in the books that the beer companies and wine companies put in there, saying you had to be a certain size and you had to be this and that in order to do beer or wine. When we threw those out, you have craft breweries started up. And I don't know if you like craft beer or wine, but they're all over the world, all over the country now, because those regulations were thrown out and allowed people to get in there and start making beer and wine that in boutique areas that some of them have turned into pretty big businesses. So I was involved with President Carter for those things. And then later on, after the administration, I got involved with a company out of New York doing politics, both in working with commercials and also managing campaigns, both domestically, where I worked in the Southeast for them, representing them, looking for clients and business in the Southeast, but also abroad. And I wrote two of the books that I wrote about campaigns, one in Panama, where the Panama Canal treaties mandated they have to have free elections to elect civilians to run the government, not the military. And I was involved in one of the elections to get rid of Noriega and his government. That didn't work out because he came in and threw everybody out after the election. A couple of years later, we invaded Panama and threw him out. The next year, I got involved in an election in Greece, the cradle of democracy. And in there, we were involved with the Russians, and there were three groups. Basically, it was the Greek business people, ship owners and whatnot. And then there were socialists, and then there were communists. And the communist leader was Igor Andropov, who was Yuri Andropov's son, who was the head of Russia. He was Putin's mentor. And so we were dealing in international politics, trying to win the hearts and minds of a country through political ads and political speeches and running basic politics. And that was really one of the last kind of political battles for influence over a country before Russia fell. This was in 94, 5. And we had a battle with them. We lost that, came back and won it the next time. But those were interesting things to be involved in at a relatively young age, to see how kind of the world worked or didn't work, depending on what your perception was of it.
Well, I have to ask, I know the examples you've given, especially your campaign work, they sound extremely challenging, but I'm wondering if the act of campaigning hasn't dramatically changed since that time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, when I first started in politics, and it was like that, I think, in most everywhere. When somebody was going to run for office, they wanted to run for the school board or county commissioner or city commissioner's council or something, they essentially would get their friends and family and neighbors, and they'd round each other up, make up a brochure, and go knock on doors. And that was pretty much it. That's how things used to work. And then people started using radio and TV. It got more and more involved. And as I got involved in it at a time when that whole political world was growing and getting sort of out of hand, when I became kind of the international consultant, by that time you had all kind of polling, all kind of media going on. There's always been disinformation in politics. You can go back and look at some of the early founding fathers' things. It was really gross and really excessive things they said about each other. And that hadn't stopped, basically. It's gotten more sophisticated. We've got more channels to spread disinformation. And we've kind of lost the moral core that we used to have of being outraged. Used to be you'd have Walter Cronkite or somebody on TV, and you listen to them, and they would give you the information based on facts. They wouldn't try to, skew it in any direction. Now the talking heads on TV, they're all about theatrics. They're all about making up stuff and getting ratings more than giving you honest, straightforward information. It's really kind of a disservice to the American public, and it's helped with the polarization that's happened in this country. It's helped us go to our corners where we find like people who think like us. We're uncomfortable a lot of times being around somebody that doesn't think like us, act like us, look like us. What happened to America and the whole concept and the idea we had of being a country that was a melting pot, that was proud of diversity, that was proud of all the kind of people we could get involved doing what we wanted to do. I mean, that's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle of a lot of the things that have gone on recently, unfortunately. And a lot of that has to do with the way politics has emerged and evolved, and I think in some ways not for the better.
Mr. Beck, I'm curious now, just listening to what you're talking about, and and not to get too deep in the weeds, but I just think about the recent shootings of Valdosta and gun control. And I'm just thinking that's how it works. It seems like, we draw the line in the sand somewhere, and only one or two issues determine what team we're on. So it's almost like there's no middle ground to even have really debate or discussions.
I'm a little trouble hearing you, but I think you're talking about the single issue candidates or voters. Is that was your question?
No, what I was saying was, do we even have room for debate anymore in the political sphere, especially with issues like gun control?
Well, we should. The problem is, where are you going to have that debate? In part, our media has gotten skewed where you used to have some objective media sources out there. There are places you could go and people would ask you objective questions. You could bring in pros and cons and have a discussion, an honest discussion. And nowadays, even most media outlets are representing left or right, and the people that are on there are representing left or right. They interview each other. They only bring on people to reinforce their own views. You get people that are skewed one direction or the other. So when you have a subject like guns or abortion or anything that's highly controversial to start with and needs to be considered objectively, seriously, without a lot of hyperbole, without a lot of passion, but can be talked out and look honestly at what are the options here, what can we do, and bring in honest brokers to have those discussions. It's hard to find a place to do it. And then it's hard to find any more people that will come and speak their mind without being concerned that their constituents or that the people who influence their constituents will say something bad about them, and then they won't run. There was a person I heard about last week that came out and said something about gun control. Immediately, he was overwhelmed with calls to his office, and he resigned from Congress. So where are you going to do this? Who are you going to find to have those conversations? We're missing the venues that we can go and have honest discussions.
We are coming up on our first break. So let me reintroduce you. We're talking with Jay Beck, marketing and communications veteran, and also a former employee for Jimmy Carter when he was in office, and novelist. And we have a lot more to talk about, so don't go away. We'll be back shortly.
I know you've had your moments of doubt and struggle, and I'm here to say I'm proud of you.
And although each one of us may take a different path, may we look back upon today as the moment we stepped into a larger world, a greater world,
You will pass this way but once. Do it right.
If ever there was a time to follow your passion and do something that matters to you, now is certainly that time.
Welcome back to Community Watch. We're having a conversation with Jay Beck, who is a novelist, marketing and communication specialist, has worked in the executive office of the president under Jimmy Carter, has run international political campaigns and much else. I do want to ask you about your writing, but before we get there, I noticed that one of your, I guess, clients is the right word, was the Carter Center. And I just wondered, I don't think a lot of people, even in this area, know what the Carter Center does. I mean, I think a few do, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work with the Carter Center.
Happy to. President and Mrs. Carter started the Carter Center about 40 years ago, and it's a place that was designed to work primarily in peace and health, more offshore than inside this country. We've had some programs here in the United States, most particularly mental health programs, which is Mrs. Carter's primary cause. But we've worked a lot offshore, and in the offshore work, it's been helping emerging democracies learn how to have free and fair elections. So in that, we go in and kind of show them how to set up an election, how to count the votes, how to do things properly. We meet with all the political parties, all the candidates, make sure everybody buys in to the same set of rules and regulations and appreciation of the outcome of the elections. And then we monitor the elections to make sure they held properly. And we kind of sanctioned it. Yeah, that was a good one, or no, it stunk, you cheated, and we're going to tell everybody it was no good. And in the health area, we've worked in some places in Africa and South America, primarily where there's some tropical diseases that are just awful, that thank the Lord we don't have here, but they're very debilitating. And it keeps people from working. In some cases, the diseases are just so debilitating, people can't work. It affects the families, it affects the income. And we have worked with several tropical diseases. One was called guinea worm, which in the Bible is kind of referred to as the fiery serpent. And that's something that these worms get into your body and come out a lot of times in your joints. And you can't walk, you can't move. And sometimes it takes several weeks for these worms to emerge. They can be 3 feet long. It's very nasty. And when we started doing this, there were about 3 or 4 million cases in the world. Now there's about 15. We're right there toward the end of getting rid of guinea worm. Another one is river blindness, which is a very debilitating thing. These are, again, tropical diseases, a lot of them caused by bad water. And we've worked to try to make the world a better place by helping people learn to help themselves. We have the philosophy of sort of teaching the person to fish. We don't go in there, we know how to do it better than you do, blah, blah, blah. We go in there and kind of do a train the trainer situation and let the people in those areas help themselves. We provide medicine and advice and money, and then let them go and be the heroes of, making things better for themselves. And that's kind of the way the Carter Center has worked for 40 years.
Well, I know that they do pretty amazing work around the world. I sometimes wish we had a version to help us here at home with a lot of things that seem to be happening. But
what President Carter offers that we would never have an election in the United States because there's no standards. The practices of how to hold an election, what are the rules? Every state, every county can have their own nuanced values and ways of doing business. So it's kind of nuts here. But getting people to agree here, as Gregory was saying earlier, getting people to agree on what to do and work together is proven pretty difficult here recently.
Well,
Now, Mr.
go ahead, Greg, go ahead.
Now, Doc said earlier you were a novelist, so I'm interested to hear about the 2 books you have written.
Well, I've written 5.
Okay.
Most recently, I completed a trilogy on politics, on international politics, where the hero of the book was a political consultant, which was somebody that was kind of like me, but a lot better looking and a lot more competent. And they were based on campaigns that I did in Panama and in Greece. And the most recent version was a campaign I did as a deputy campaign manager to Ross Perot, and it's called Third Party. And it takes a look at third parties in America, in the US, and looks at the history of what's happened with third parties and what could happen in the future. It looks at Ross Perot. It's a historical novel, meaning that there's fiction woven into the history, and it's an effort to make you think more about what happened in history and what could have happened in history than saying this is absolutely how it was. But I think that with everything that's so unsettled in the world today, and particularly in our politics today, it's useful to look at all of these options of where things might go. And if you look at what's happened, well, just let's take the election 2000, for instance. You had George W. Bush and Al Gore. The difference in that election was a few thousand votes. If you remember Florida, people look at hanging chads and stuff. You had Ralph Nader running as a third-party candidate who got 3 million votes in that election. Okay, I mean, there are a lot of these elections where third-party candidates run. They get very close, and a third-party candidate can make a big difference. Ross Perot was the most successful third-party candidate ever. He got 19% of the vote nationally, and that's probably what elected Bill Clinton. Polling show he might have drawn equally from Bush or Clinton. I would argue he probably drew more from Bush than Clinton. And Clinton got elected with like 42 or 3% of the vote. And so a third party candidate could emerge. Let's take a for instance here. For instance, in 2024, what if the Republicans nominated somebody other than Donald Trump? They found somebody else who wanted to be their standard bearer. And the Democrats had somebody, it could be one of several Democrats. And so you had the Republicans with their nominee, the Democrats with their nominee, and then President Trump decides, I'm going to run as a third party candidate. So he's got a lot of Trump followers, he's got a lot of money. What would happen? Think of the scenario of 3 candidates running in 2024, what that would do to the election and what that would do up and down the ballot too, for everything, not just the presidential election. But so thinking about third parties, and that's what I try to do in this book, is look at the nuanced ways that third parties can affect both the 92 election, which is what Perot was in, but in subsequent elections and in the future. So that was the gist of what that was about.
And now that you bring that up, I'm sorry, Doc, but now that you bring that up, that would be very interesting if former President Trump ran as an independent third-party ticket, because he does have appeal. So that would be interesting to see how that would work.
Yep. And in history, there have been a lot of third-party candidates. George Wallace when he ran in 1968, he was at 20% in the polls at one time, 20% in the polls. He had a vice president that said some crazy things about nuking Vietnam, and his popularity dropped to about 8% in the final election. But you've had third-party candidates win. George Wallace still won 5 states He won 5 states, the electoral votes of 5 in that. So when you think of what could happen in a third party candidate in 2024 or anywhere down the road with someone who decided they wanted to do that, and the thing that could happen, the thing that's changed, the internet allows you to raise money. If you're charismatic and you've got a good message, you can get on the internet and use social networking, and you can raise a ton of money and be competitive. That's changed the game and how politics works. And it's made it more likely that somebody that really gets driven to want to run for president as a third party could be moderately successful, if not completely successful. I outline in my book, Third Party, how Ross Perot could have won. And in several different ways, we had plans for him to campaign. He was not a good candidate. Let's be right up front about that. He was not a good candidate, but the mechanics were there for him to win. And I think that mechanics could be there for another person to win down the road, or certainly to influence the elections dramatically.
Well, I am curious because listening to you talk about past elections is fascinating. And I love novels. I love them. But I'm curious why you chose that route for your books instead of a nonfiction, interpretation of your experiences.
Writing about the mechanics of distributing brochures is not the most exciting way to read a book. So I wanted to give it pizzazz. I wanted to give it story. I wanted to give exciting women. And in all my books, I have CIA characters sneaking around in the background. I have things that keep the books moving and keep the story moving and keep it interesting. Because I think it's not history. It's not a nonprofit. It's not how to conduct a campaign. It is a story of how this group of characters conducted a campaign and all the stuff that can come into it. Spies inside the campaign, cheating, lying, all this other stuff that does happen. But I've described it in a story that unfolds and you can follow in a sequence that makes sense to you. And looking at campaigns purely objectively, it's a hard story to tell.
So you get the benefit of the historical element and an exciting story all in one.
Absolutely. And a dashing character that's sort of like me, but a lot better and with more hair.
Well, the latest novel is called Third Party, and I see that it's on Amazon. I assume it's available.
Barnes and Noble and Amazon, yeah.
And so, and several of your other books are also available. And you have a website with more information.
Yes, jbeck.net.
jbeck.net. So anyone that wants to find out more about your books can go there, jbeck.net, and the books are for sale, Barnes and Noble and Amazon. We are about out of time. I feel like we could do 5 or 6 shows with you and not have a gap. So we may try to get you back again. I hope you'll be open to it.
Yes, sir. It'd be fun. I enjoyed the conversations. I appreciate spending time with you. And I thank you for what you're doing to inform the public here. That's a great thing.
Well, thank you. And to all of you out there watching, thank you for joining us on Community Watch. We will see you next time. Bye now.